Hi guys, how old are you? I'd love to see the age range of our viewers. Write your age below.
It was one of those perfectly ordinary Sundays, the kind that pretends to be peaceful but hums with tension under the surface, like an old power line buzzing above your head while nobody else seems to hear it. The roast was overcooked. The green beans had that sad limpness that comes from sitting out too long, and the conversation meandered the way it always did, tiptoeing around anything real. My mother Diane sat at the head of the table in her usual posture, back straight, napkin folded in her lap, like some high school principal who never quite stepped out of her role, even in retirement. My sister Melissa, the golden child, the crown jewel, the walking photo frame of what a daughter should be, sat beside her, smiling that smile she'd perfected over decades of being the favorite. And me? I was right where I always was, quiet, polite, and trying not to care. Dinner at Mom's house had always been more performance than meal, but this one had a strange edge to it. Something sharp in the way Mom's eyes flicked over me when I mentioned I'd signed a lease on a bigger space for my boutique. No congratulations, not even a forced nod. Just a long pause, followed by her favorite sport, comparison. She didn't even bother to wait for a lull in conversation. Melissa was bragging about her daughter making the honor roll when Mom, without turning her head, looked directly at me and said, "You'll never be as pretty or successful as your sister, Rachel. But I guess you've made your peace with that." For a moment, nobody spoke. Not even Melissa, who usually had the grace, or guilt, to pretend she didn't enjoy it when Mom cut me down. My fork froze midair, just inches from the chipped plate, and I looked up, meeting her eyes. Not in anger, not even shock. Just a long, calm gaze like I was reading a stranger's face and wondering what went so wrong in their wiring. I didn't say a word. I just smiled. Not the kind of smile people give when they're happy, but the kind that makes the air in the room feel colder. I collected the plates slowly, one by one, stacking them neatly in a tower that threatened to topple but never did. My hands were steady. I walked them to the kitchen, ran the water, and started scrubbing like I had something important to do, like the sound of the tap could drown out what had just happened. They stayed at the table, awkwardly sipping wine. Melissa muttered something about work. Mom went back to the roast like she hadn't just said the ugliest thing a mother could say to a daughter in front of family. And I stood alone in that claustrophobic little kitchen, with its yellowing wallpaper and the smell of resentment baked into every corner. And the strangest part? I wasn't even hurt. Not anymore. I felt nothing, and that scared me a little. Later that night, I drove home, radio off, windows down, letting the air hit my face like maybe it could wash off the years of second place. When I got in, I poured a glass of wine, kicked off my shoes, and opened my laptop. Not for work, not for emails. I opened a blank document and titled it, "Things I Could Say But Don't." That was the first time I let the idea form in my mind. Not revenge, not payback, but something quieter, something smarter. A reckoning that wouldn't come with screaming or accusations or the drama they'd expect from someone they'd spent years underestimating. No, it would come from silence, from watching, from knowing the right moment to let the truth drop like a stone in still water and watch the ripples spread. 2 days later, at almost midnight, I got a text from Melissa. No emojis, no fake warmth, just 6 words that made me sit up straight and stare at the screen like it might start talking. "Call me. Mom's locked herself in her room crying and won't say a word." I didn't reply. Not right away. I just stared at it, then leaned back and smiled that same smile I gave her over dinner. Not happy, not cruel, just knowing. Because when someone like Diane Klein finally breaks, she doesn't do it loudly. She does it the way she lived, quiet, prideful, and messy as hell on the inside. And I knew even then that something had cracked in her. But the real question, the one that would haunt Melissa, and maybe even you watching this, was what broke her? Was it something I said, or something I never had to say? Now let me ask you something. If your mother looked you dead in the eye during dinner and told you you'd never measure up, what would you do? Smile and carry the plates? Or let the whole damn table burn? Tell me in the comments. I'm really curious which of us is the crazy one. And that was just the beginning. When people talk about childhood, they usually wrap it in warm colors and blurred edges, like a photo that's been filtered to hide the sharp parts. But mine always comes back in clean detail. Edges too crisp, lighting too cold, and always with Melissa's voice, just a little louder than mine. A little closer to Mom's ear, a little more welcome in any room we walked into together. I was not the kind of child that people described as a handful or a delight or a bright star. I was the one who stayed quiet in the back seat, who did her homework without reminders, who learned early that silence often hurts less than speaking. And from as far back as I can remember, Mom made it very clear. There was Melissa, and then there was me. Melissa had a way of taking up space that never seemed to need permission. She walked into a room like she already belonged, which maybe she did, because our mother looked at her like she was some kind of trophy she'd earned and polished and placed on the mantel for everyone to admire. And me? I was more like furniture, useful, present, but not worth commenting on unless I was in the way. I remember once in 7th grade, I came home with a school art award. Nothing huge, but it mattered to me. I handed Mom the certificate, waiting for some flicker of pride, and she barely glanced at it before asking, "Is this one of those everyone gets one awards?" A week later, Melissa got a B+ on a chemistry quiz, and Mom took her out for lunch to celebrate hard work. That was the rhythm, small victories ignored, minor losses scrutinized, and Melissa's every stumble padded with excuses, while my small wins evaporated before they could be noticed. It wasn't always obvious, not to outsiders. At church or school functions, we looked like a nice enough family. 2 daughters, one always smiling and chattering, the other a little more reserved, holding her mother's purse without being asked. And if anyone ever caught on to the imbalance, it was dismissed with phrases like, "Rachel's just more independent," or "Melissa needs more attention, she's under pressure." I learned to stop expecting fairness the way some kids learn to stop believing in Santa. It's not a dramatic revelation, just a slow erosion of belief, until all you're left with is the hollow space where hope used to be. When Dad died, I think part of me expected, no, hoped, that something might shift. He was the only one who ever saw me, really saw me, who asked about my day like it mattered, who once told me he liked the way I noticed things other people missed. His heart gave out one unremarkable Tuesday morning, and just like that, whatever balance I'd had in that house tipped permanently in Melissa's favor. Mom collapsed into grief like a performance, clutching Melissa's hand through every tearful church service and sympathy call, while I stood by the kitchen window the night after the funeral, watching the wind shake the last brown leaves from the trees, wondering if I was supposed to feel more broken than I did. I remember my engagement party, 5 years ago now, modest, homemade food, friends from the shop, fairy lights strung across the backyard. Melissa showed up late, in a red dress too flashy for the occasion, with a bottle of champagne, and a passive-aggressive joke about how someone's finally getting a ring. Mom laughed louder than anyone. That was the night I knew. I wasn't just the second daughter. I was the other daughter, the placeholder, the one they mentioned in passing when bragging about our family. But I never fought back, not once. I didn't scream, didn't confront, didn't ask why. I told myself I was above it, that staying silent was the high road. But the truth was simpler, uglier. I stayed silent because I knew they weren't listening. I could have read them my soul, and they would have checked their watches halfway through. So I learned to smile. I learned to serve the coffee, clear the dishes, ask about Melissa's job like I cared. I became the woman who blends in, who's easy to overlook. And in doing so, I became dangerous. Because when you're always in second place, you have 2 choices. Keep running until you collapse, or slow down. Watch the race from the shadows and learn exactly where everyone's weaknesses lie. I chose the latter, not consciously at first, but slowly with each birthday party where Melissa got the biggest slice, with each holiday where Mom made me sleep on the couch while Melissa got the guest room, with each laugh that felt like a knife. And by the time I realized it, I'd memorized their soft spots, the way a boxer studies his opponent's jaw. So when I got that text from Melissa, Mom crying, locked in her room, I didn't panic. I didn't feel a rush of sympathy or a surge of concern. I felt a calmness that surprised even me, because deep down, I knew something she didn't. This wasn't sudden. It didn't come out of nowhere. This was rot finally reaching the surface. And rot takes years to grow. I hadn't pushed. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't threatened. But I had watched and remembered and waited. And now I was starting to wonder what would happen if I finally decided to stop playing second. Not by outshining anyone, but by letting the lights go out one by one until I was the only one who could still see. There's a strange kind of power that grows in silence, not the forced kind, where you hold your tongue out of fear or politeness, but the kind that builds slowly over time, like a fog that creeps into every crack without anyone noticing until they're choking on it. That was the kind of silence I'd mastered over the years. I used to think it made me invisible, that it was a kind of weakness, a trait I had to live with like bad eyesight or flat feet. But now I saw it for what it truly was, a weapon disguised as surrender. And once I accepted that, I stopped wasting energy trying to be understood by people who only ever listened when Melissa spoke. The Monday after that dinner, I stopped by Mom's house unannounced. Not to apologize or smooth things over, but simply to show up, to reassert my presence, calmly and without excuse. I rang the doorbell twice, even though I had a key, because I wanted her to know I was no longer walking in the way she was used to, no longer slipping in and out like an afterthought. She answered the door in her robe, her hair unbrushed, her expression a carefully neutral mask that barely covered the bruised pride beneath. "Didn't expect you," she said, stepping aside without really inviting me in. And I smiled politely, taking in the house with fresh eyes. The wilting plants on the windowsill, the stack of unopened mail, the way the family photos on the wall seemed curated to tell a story that was never quite true. I brought her coffee, the way I used to when Dad was alive, and she let herself lean on someone, if only for a moment. She sat at the table, sipping slowly, avoiding my gaze, and I asked her about her garden, the hydrangeas she used to fuss over every spring. She mumbled something about the weather, her fingers twitching near her mug, and then I leaned back and said, in the most casual voice I could manage, "Do you ever forget things, Mom? Like important stuff from the past?" She blinked, thrown off by the shift, and I kept going before she could regroup. Sometimes I think about Dad's last few months and wonder if we all just remember it differently. I mean, he was so quiet at the end. Do you ever wonder what he didn't say? Her eyes flicked up, sharp now, defensive, but I didn't push. I just let the question hang there, heavy and unfinished. That's how it started. Not with a confrontation, not with a scream, but with small, careful cuts. Comments that sounded like concern, but landed like suspicion. I began visiting more often, always with some harmless reason, dropping off soup, checking the mailbox, bringing her favorite cinnamon rolls from the bakery near my shop. Each time, I'd leave something behind, a childhood photo, a newspaper clipping, an old note in Dad's handwriting, and always in a place she'd stumble across it without realizing it was planted. I didn't accuse her of anything. I simply reminded her quietly and relentlessly of the years she had edited, of the moments she had rewritten to suit her own narrative. To Melissa, I remained the same as ever, unthreatening, quiet, mildly disappointing. I called her once that week, asked how her kids were, congratulated her on a work award she hadn't told me about. I even suggested we all get together for brunch, pretending like I was trying to rebuild something fragile and noble. She bought it. Why wouldn't she? She had spent our whole lives believing I was incapable of complexity, of strategy, of anything resembling ambition. That was her first mistake. Meanwhile, Mom was slipping. Not in any dramatic, visible way. She still held her posture, still hosted bridge nights, still corrected the cashier's grammar at the grocery store, but I could see it. She started repeating herself in conversations, hesitating before using certain names, staring at her reflection just a little too long. I wasn't gaslighting her, not really. I was just giving her the mirror she had avoided for decades, and letting her face what stared back without my interference. One afternoon, I found her in the attic, digging through old boxes, clearly unsettled, though she tried to hide it. "I was just looking for Dad's college yearbook," she said, her voice too bright, too practiced. I nodded, offered to help, and as we sifted through the past, I pulled out a sealed envelope addressed in my father's handwriting. I handed it to her, then walked away before she could ask what it was or why I looked so calm. I didn't know what was in it, and I didn't care. It was the not knowing that would drive her crazy. That was the point. The following week, Melissa cornered me at the farmer's market, of all places. She looked flustered, not angry exactly, but wary in a way I hadn't seen since we were kids, and she realized I'd learned how to lie without blinking. "What's going on with Mom?" she asked, skipping pleasantries, her voice tight. "She's been weird, like really weird. Did you say something to her?" I blinked slowly, feigning confusion. Weird how? Maybe she's just tired. Getting older's not easy, you know? I said, my tone soft, my face concerned, like I hadn't been planting seeds in our mother's mind for weeks. Melissa stared at me for a second too long, searching for something, but she didn't know where to look. She still thought I was playing checkers while she played chess. She didn't realize I'd stopped playing their game entirely. By the end of that month, Mom had started locking her bedroom door at night. Not because she was afraid of anyone outside, but because something inside her own head had started making too much noise. And me, I just kept visiting, kept smiling, kept bringing cookies and reminding her, ever so gently, that the past has teeth. And sometimes the quiet ones are the ones you should have been afraid of all along. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. Because there's a difference between vengeance and balance. And all I was doing was restoring the scales. One quiet, well-placed moment at a time. It happened on a rainy Thursday. The kind of dreary, wet day that seems to press in around the edges of your life, like fog creeping under the door, dulling everything it touches, softening even the harshest outlines until nothing feels real or solid anymore. I'd been getting the sense for days that something was building inside Mom's house, like static in the air before a storm, that electric tension that doesn't quite register until the thunder finally cracks. When Melissa called that morning, her voice too sharp, her words clipped like someone trying to sound calm and failing, I already knew, in the quiet space beneath her worry, that the walls had started to crumble. "She won't come out of her room," she said, trying not to sound panicked. "She won't eat, she won't talk, and she keeps locking the door." "What the hell did you say to her, Rachel?" I didn't answer right away because there was no simple way to explain the accumulation of years, of silence, of sharp little truths left to fester. So instead, I told her I'd be there in an hour, and hung up before she could accuse me of anything she didn't yet understand. The drive over felt familiar, like muscle memory, but also strangely final. Each turn, each passing street, felt heavier than usual, as though I were being pulled by something I'd set in motion long ago, something I could no longer pause or redirect. When I arrived, Melissa was pacing in the front yard, wearing mismatched sweatpants and a designer coat like she'd thrown herself together in panic and didn't stop to care what it looked like. She rushed to meet me, eyes wide and darting, as if I held some secret code to unlocking whatever was going wrong inside. "She won't open the door," she hissed, pulling at her sleeves. She said something about Dad, about something he left behind. And then she just, "Rachel, she's not okay." And for a moment, I almost felt it. That old instinct to fix things, to soothe her, to be the calm one who cleaned up messes without asking for credit. But I let it pass. Instead, I stepped past her, into the house, which now felt like a mausoleum, not because it was quiet, but because the air itself felt stale and heavy, like it had been holding its breath for too long. The door to her room was locked, as promised. I knocked once, then again, not sharply, but gently, like someone waking a child from a bad dream. "Mom," I said through the door, keeping my voice low and steady. "It's me, Rachel. I just want to talk. Can you open the door?" There was no answer, but I heard movement, a shuffling of feet, the slight creak of the bed frame, the unmistakable sound of breath being held too long. And then I leaned in, let my forehead rest gently against the wood, and spoke the line I'd been carrying with me like a loaded gun in my pocket, waiting for the right moment to aim it. "I know about the letters, Mom, the ones from Dad. I found one. You knew he was writing to me. You kept them." Silence followed, long and thick. But something behind that door shifted, something broke. Not with a bang, but with the quiet finality of glass cracking under pressure. She still didn't answer, but I didn't need her to. I could feel the collapse happening, like the floor beneath her was finally giving way, and all the walls she'd built around her version of the past were buckling under the weight of reality. I turned and walked away past Melissa, who stared at me like I'd just struck our mother through the door, her mouth open, a dozen unspoken accusations fighting for airtime. "What did you say to her?" she demanded, grabbing my arm, her grip tighter than it needed to be. I looked at her for a long moment, taking in the fear behind her fury, and answered with something that wasn't quite a lie, but wasn't the whole truth either. I reminded her of something she forgot, I said, then pulled free and went into the kitchen. There on the counter was the old family diary, worn leather, broken spine, the one Mom used to write in every Christmas, every birthday, every milestone she deemed worthy of recording. But now it sat out in the open, pages loose, and on top of it, a yellow sticky note in her handwriting that read, "Some daughters write, some read, some remember everything." Melissa picked it up like it might explode, her face a mask of confusion turning slowly into something close to horror. "What does this mean?" she asked, her voice trembling now. I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because the truth was, I hadn't found the letters. I hadn't read anything, but she didn't know that. And Mom? She didn't know what I had or hadn't seen. That was the point. In a family built on half-truths and careful performances, the suggestion of knowledge was more dangerous than any actual revelation. It let their guilt do the work for me. I walked out of that kitchen feeling lighter than I had in years. Not because I had won. This wasn't a game, not really, but because I had finally stepped out of the script they wrote for me, the one where I was always behind, always lesser, always swallowing the bitterness they served with a smile. Now I was rewriting it. Not loudly, not cruelly, just quietly, deliberately, like someone who's finally learned that the most powerful voice in the room doesn't have to shout. And as I drove home that night, the rain still falling, the road slick and shining under the streetlights, I thought about the way Melissa had looked at me, like she was starting to realize she never really knew me at all. That was what made people uneasy, wasn't it? Not anger, not revenge, but calm. A calm so deep, it made them wonder what lived underneath. And in that silence, I finally heard the sound I'd been waiting for all my life. Not apologies, not explanations, not even forgiveness, but the unmistakable crack of something old and cruel finally coming undone. There's a particular stillness that follows a breakdown, not the dramatic, messy kind you see in movies, but the slow unraveling that takes place behind closed doors, the kind that doesn't make noise so much as it alters the air around it, making everything feel off-kilter, as though the world itself has shifted slightly on its axis and no one else has noticed. In the days that followed the incident with the locked door and the diary left on the counter, Mom remained almost entirely silent, speaking in fragments when she spoke at all, her voice small and unsure, as though every word she uttered had to be tested first, against some internal wall she no longer trusted to hold. Melissa was a mess, of course, her polished veneer cracking in real time as she tried to juggle work, the kids, and a mother who had suddenly become a ghost inside her own home. I watched all of it unfold not with glee, because despite what anyone might think, This was never about joy or vengeance, but with a quiet, complex satisfaction that came from seeing the scales tip. After years of imbalance, from witnessing the consequences of things long denied finally taking shape in ways that could no longer be ignored or dismissed as exaggeration or bitterness. I didn't rush in to fix anything, didn't offer advice or take charge, because that's not who I was anymore, or perhaps it's never who I truly was at all. I simply made myself present. I showed up, brought groceries, folded laundry, sat in the living room with Mom while she stared at nothing, and let the silence fill the spaces that used to be crowded with judgment and performance. And it was in that silence, strangely enough, that the truth began to hum. Not spoken aloud, not confirmed in any explicit way, but felt in the tremble of her fingers as she passed me a teacup, in the way her eyes refused to meet mine, in the careful way she now approached me, not like a daughter she'd raised, but like someone who held a version of the past she could no longer control. Melissa kept trying to fix things the way she always had, with phone calls to therapists, printed out meal plans, medication schedules, but none of it touched the core of the problem because what had broken inside our mother wasn't just emotional, it was moral. Somewhere in the fog of what she had convinced herself was right and deserved, she'd glimpsed the reality of what she had done, and that reality was so far from the story she had told herself all these years that her mind, faced with the collision of past and present, simply retreated. There was a moment, only a few seconds really, that I'll carry with me forever. Not because it offered closure, but because it confirmed that, even now, nothing was simple. I was sitting beside her, both of us watching the rain slide down the window like thin rivers trying to find a path. And without turning her head, she said almost too softly to hear, "You were always watching, weren't you?" I didn't answer because the truth didn't need to be spoken. We both knew it. That line, delivered without anger, without defense, was the closest thing to an admission she'd ever offer. And in that moment, I felt something inside me shift, not in triumph, but in release. Melissa, to her credit, tried to demand answers in her own way, cornering me in the hallway one afternoon with her hands on her hips and fire in her voice. "What is all this?" she snapped, gesturing wildly at the house, the mood, our mother's deterioration. "What did you do, Rachel?" And for the first time, I looked her directly in the eye, not with defensiveness, not with cruelty, but with the calm certainty of someone who has finally stopped apologizing for existing. "I didn't do anything, Melissa," I said slowly, every word deliberate. "I just stopped pretending." That, more than anything, seemed to shake her, because deep down, she knew the truth. All of this had been built on pretense. From Mom's favoritism, to her own carefully cultivated image, to the idea that I was the weak one, the irrelevant one, the girl who stayed quiet because she had nothing to say. And now that I had stepped out of that shadow, not with noise but with presence, the whole illusion was crumbling around them, not because I attacked it, but because they could no longer hold it up on their own. In the end, there were no confrontations, no family meetings where secrets were spilled and tears were shed. There was no dramatic reveal of old letters or hidden abuse, just the steady, suffocating weight of everything unspoken finally catching up to them. Mom began seeing a therapist, or so Melissa said. I didn't ask for details, I didn't press, I didn't need to, because whether she got better or not wasn't my responsibility. My role had never been to fix her. It had only ever been to remember. One evening, as I was leaving after a short visit, I paused in the hallway outside her bedroom. She was sitting in the same chair she always used, staring at the wall, not reading, not watching television, just sitting. I didn't call her name. I didn't try to comfort her. I simply said softly, "You were right, you know. I'm not Melissa." And I let the silence after that sentence carry the weight of everything else I could have said, but didn't. She didn't respond. She didn't need to, because in that silence lived every choice she had ever made, and every one I had made in return. And now, if you've made it this far, Maybe you're wondering the same thing I still ask myself sometimes when I can't sleep. Was I cruel? Or was I just honest in a family that never allowed it? Did I break her? Or did I simply stop holding her up? Tell me, if someone locked themselves inside a lie for decades and you simply handed them a mirror, are you to blame for what they see? Because I'm still not sure.